Yeah, I just wanted to do some string games, or more commonly known as Cat's Cradle, and formerly as string figures. Nich Daané'é, Éigeia, Nich Tł'ooł Daané'é, yeah, that's what we call it, Tł'ooł Daané'é. And it's something I grew up learning. I think it's a byproduct of the weaving dynasty that most Navajos have accumulated, and it's a very seasonal pastime. So before it's the first day of spring, but I have yet to hear any thunder, which signals our new season and to put away the string games, because traditionally they were taught by Spider Woman, Nashje's son, who gave us weaving. I know that most anthropologists and other historians might like to beg to differ and say that a lot of Spanish influence gave us the textiles, but my hot take in terms of reclaiming rhetorical sovereignty, our string games have been around for as long as we've had access to mountain goats, and I think there was weaving way back then. But again, that's just a hot take and probably basing it off of more fantasized oral traditions. Um, Again, with indigenous ecological knowledge systems that get passed on, I have been lucky enough to still grow up in a community where it's thriving and it exists, and I have access to parts of my identity that most people would otherwise feign away from, or um, would like access to, but have lost due to a lot of historical trauma, like the boarding school victims. The way I was taught is there are four different kinds of strings that you need to do. And I see this as a way of building an encouragement for, I guess, the ways in which mathematical thinking exists outside of a critical or a capitalistic framework of mind and society that demands our mathematical thinking go towards technology, finance, and other more shallow, immediate gratification lifestyles. So I am a current doctoral student for mathematics education. I'm trying to get my certification and educational doctorates, so that I can become a math professor and eventually teach math and create um, Daané'é curriculums. But I'm still quite a long ways from that, and this is more or less a reflection about how far I've come with understanding that functions and, I guess, deeper understandings of critically rich problems are overlooked. We oftentimes put the kinds of math out in the world that encourages a skill or a mastery of that skill, rather than actually understanding it wholly and truly for where and when these kinds of ideas come up. I guess that's the kind of math that we see in like K through 12. It's a lot of memorizing, um, and I guess in some sense does build a foundation so that you can call upon these ideas more easily as you begin to use it as research and require more creativity to start um, posing questions that may not necessarily have a concrete answer, which is one of the biggest reasons I always loved um, math, is because you were able to have a solid solution. So the first one I'm going to tell, the first four string figures to do in a traditional Tł'ooł Daané'é, as I was told by my teacher, my fifth grade Navajo teacher, Miss Dempsey, the late Marilyn Miss Dempsey, is the first one, because we're about our four directions and it represents a very powerful cycle to us, is Sonsa. Diaries is just one big diamond. It's, if you look through it, it's supposed to represent an Hitsaha case and our thoughts. I personally enjoy it because it allows me to begin the cycle. Hayosh Kosh in the east is our dawn. So the cycle represents kind of a lot of things. It's a good praxis of mine. SBH is the acronym that a lot of more higher Navajo scholars are starting to utilize. And a lot of this isn't new. It's just literature that I've read from as I've studied. and not necessarily coins, because again, I feel like that's more of like a cultural capital that I've acquired just by proxy. Adonana to the south. So we're very much about our clockwise directions. So if you start in the east and you go clockwise, you're turning to your right. That represents the planning, Edige Nahata. Um, and I think the next one is you do a Dilgehe, which is a constellation, which I think a lot of these kinds of string games end up representing like a template to our cultural oral traditions, or at least serve as a good talking point. I always thought it looked like an igloo, but I guess there are 7 little rhombus shapes in here that help us indicate when it's time to plant. At the same season when Pleiades comes out in the southern sky, and we're able to like, oh, this is a good time for planting. The next one, if I don't knot it up and get all confused on myself, is gonna be to the west as we keep doing our circular motion, Erigie Ina, and that's life. So after you think and plan, you live it. You have the actions that go about it. It's also kind of like the ending of life too, because when the sun sets, it eventually becomes the nighttime. And in this one, we have the mini stars. Sane. Oh, that one's not as pretty. The first Navajo mathematician who became a professor, Thomas Storer, also had written a paper on heart sequences and used a little bit of, or at least took inspiration and motivation from how they trivialized string games and figures as not necessarily strict knot theory, but also it serves as such a strong praxis and understanding for mathematical thoughts and functions. I'm at the point now where in topology we create all kinds of different operations and don't necessarily exist in the same 1 plus 1 equals 2 number set realm. It's more about like intrinsic properties, about shapes, compact spaces in different dimensions that maintain intrinsic properties that don't change. The last one, not to digress, is Sompade. This is to the north. After thinking, Anetsaha case, Nahata, planning, Ina, life, there is Sihasin, Erigeya, that's hope. And this is what that one represents when it becomes nighttime again. And then the cycle continues, and we go back to the east. Miss Dempsey used to tell us that those were the first 4 that we should do. And as far as muscle memories and tactile interactions with the world give us a chance to be able to really build our memory, I think this is one of the ways that has helped us preserve our stronger connection to oral traditions. These string figures, there's a plethora of them. They are kind of like story points, but I think they also kind of developed from the winter seasons when everyone was inside during the colder, harsher months, and they were able to keep the kids busy. And then when the spring and the thunder sounds off with the first rainfall in the springtime, we end up putting it away because the pastoral agricultural life required a lot of labor outside, and they're like, we can't do this in front of the spiders or the bugs, the relatives of the person who taught us this, because it would be seen as kind of disrespectful. There's a time and place for these kinds of things, and I really enjoy it. So I guess that's another precaution as a Navajo person. Just take precautionary with these seasonal origin stories, and it's, I think, personally, a time when we can go back and have a stronger reliance on oral traditions, which tends to have a plethora of unique components outside of regular research that a lot of academia doesn't recognize. So as a way to like do transformational indigenous decolonization of these, I'm not even at that level. I mean, an encouragement toward this and a reflection towards of how these kinds of mathematical thinking and critical reasoning exist in different cultures and express themselves uniquely. I'll do one more that I really enjoy. Um, I've grown really accustomed to this, and I'm still inspired by wanting to learn more and figure out, because again, with a lot of mathematics that gets to higher pure logic reasoning, it's a study of like symmetry and beauty, and doesn't necessarily have applications, but with similar to traditional ecological knowledge systems and indigenous ecological knowledge systems that often have to wait for contemporary academics to validate what they had known since times immemorial. I think mathematics in that sense creates a praxis for a lot of patterns and properties, and establishes these theorems that eventually become very applicable to when humanity catches up with technology and other creative people find the applications in these, mathematical research endeavors, and they're able to put things like origami into use, like the ways in which you can fold a paper down helps compact space so that they can send satellites up into the atmosphere, and then they unfold as they break the atmosphere and get out to a open area. And decrease fuel. But again, that's also ironically very imperialistic, because Daané'é also said not to go to space. So again, with a lot of knowledge that ends up becoming a part of a mathematician's toolkit, and it makes them become the embodiment of gatekeeping, you have to be more responsible and aware of these situations. That's why I still take it with a grain of salt, and vlogging I felt like would be a good way to reclaim my own rhetorical sovereignty and hold claim to my voice. There's still a lot of controversy around recording and doing these kinds of things and gestures. So as a radical act for myself and just a recentering and reflection of how far I've come, I thought that this would be something worth sharing. There's still a lot of development that I need to go on, and Storr's page on heart sequences and double-sided Lagrange, these are terms from the topology he used to describe how these loops can maintain a property that exists, so that you can continue to like deconstruct and continuously deform the loops. Thank you for listening to me. I thought this would be a good way to at least wrap up or begin my develop my impetus for Navajo mathematic curriculums one day.